Let's face it, liberals are offended by everything.
Right on.
And they have zero sense of humor.
Right on.
Huh?
Right on. It's the party game that pokes fun at political correctness and liberalism run amok.
But making fun of them is hilarious for the rest of us.
So play right on and mock the progressive left and their fake news media counterparts in a variety of categories, such as race hustle, the wussification of America, earth snobs, Islam abomination, Hollywood hypocrites, and campus coddling. Feminism follies and rainbow games, and don't forget, millennial entitlement and many others.
Right on, created by conservatives for conservatives.
Because mocking the left feels so right on.
Give the gift of all year long by going to RightOnGame.com.
That's RightOnGame.com. Use promo code MOJO50 for a 10% discount. That's RightOnGame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off.
And while you're there, check out the new drinking game option.
Warning, microaggressions contained in this box. Millennials and snowflakes will be offended by its contents. Retreating to safe spaces are highly recommended.
RightOnGame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off. RightOnGame.com.
You can't handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Seat over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Seat out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 4 tree 5, 9er 2-1. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4-7 tree 9er, 8-9er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEPT. Gas TOT 5-3.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Denise Simon Experience. Well, my buddy here, Sam Faddis, who is a frequent guest on the Denise Simon Experience, and he still stays involved very much in politics, even though he is retired. Well, you still do some contract work, retired from the CIA. He wrote an interesting piece over at And magazine. I think it was titled, Sam, it's spelled COUP. Was that right?
That is correct.
Well, welcome, Sam. And let me start off by saying it this way. Aren't we supposed to have had what is known as the peaceful transfer of power from one president to the next?
Yeah, well, theoretically, that's what we're supposed to have. And, obviously that's the fact that we seem to be drifting away from that pretty quickly is the whole point of the article, right? Which is, that's ever since the beginning of the Republic, that's what we prided ourselves on, peaceful transfer of power. We fight hard, contest elections. When it's all done, we shake hands. Everybody rallies behind the new administration. We move forward. This is not a banana republic. This is not the third world. And now I guess, we can't really say that anymore. And this is very scary.
With all the brouhaha going on with the Democrats and how they're, have the media as their Praetorian Guard, doing a lot of their legwork too. What is particularly fascinating is you would think that everybody in this country would want Trump and all things Trump administration to succeed. So if there were some things that were looking to go sideways, what do? You go over to his aides and to his own gatekeepers and even to Trump himself and say, okay, let's set a bipartisan plan here so we can move forward. But they're not giving this guy 1 inch, are they?
No, because they believe they have a lock on wisdom, because they believe the ends justify the means, because power is, they want power for its own sake. I mean, look, people throw around words like Bolshevik and communist and all that kind of stuff all the time. And sometimes
Racist.
Yeah, well, but I mean, and sometimes these analogies just get really overwrought, but I think it's worth noting, and I touch on this briefly at the end of the article, that, when the Bolsheviks came to power in 1917 in Russia, they didn't say, hey, our goal is to come here, kill tens of millions of people and drive the country into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them were completely ruthless, but there were a lot of people along there who actually believed this. We're going to create a paradise stuff. But then they march down this path where you accept that you believe the ends justify the means, that step by step by step, you can justify anything because you believe you know better than anyone else, and you really do have a lock on wisdom. And the next thing you know, the unthinkable is happening. And with this whole business with Trump and the ridiculous Russian allegations, I think it is very important for everybody to focus on this. It is not, this whole investigation, the Mueller investigation, Senate investigations are all winding down. Nobody found anything that had anything to do with Trump and Russia colluding. And the temptation is going to be to sort of turn the page here and say, okay, well, we didn't find anything. That's not so much the point. The point is the people that made these allegations from the outset knew they were false.
Mm-hmm.
This was never a good faith, oh my God, we think this thing really happened matter. This was a deliberate, what we would call back in the company, covert action to destroy a sitting president, to create false evidence, false accusations, overthrow an electoral process, and take a president out of office. That's the definition of a coup. And that's what this was from the beginning, not well-intentioned people who were misled. No, they knew very cold-bloodedly exactly what they were doing from the moment they started. And if this is where we are, as I say in the article, well, then what stops us from the next time just having a president who says, I don't like the way the election turned out, I consider it null and void, and I refuse to leave office?
Most recently we had the whole Kavanaugh event, and the Kavanaugh thing went on for weeks, and
Yep.
the left mobilized all kinds of people and activists and organizations that threw this country into a full-blown tailspin, televised, which says what they did with the dossier and the top floor of the FBI was akin to what they did with Kavanaugh. So it's kind of like there aren't any limitations to this activism, is there?
There are no limitations. It is not accidental. It is not coincidence. When you see the same kind of article striking the same chord in 1,000 different news outlets on any given day, and people think, well, I guess that's real because a lot of different people are talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean anything. That's 1,000 people reading the same script that was handed to them and placing it in a news outlet, and it literally happens that way. Most people, ordinary Americans, don't realize that because they got other stuff to focus on, but that's exactly how it happens. People just get sent talking points and they write articles, and then they pop up all over the country, and you think you're seeing corroboration. All you're seeing is people singing from the same song sheet. This choreography of the dossier that you're talking about, the Steele dossier, think about this. You have a Democratic National Committee and the Hillary campaign pay for the creation of this giant, slanderous, absurd dossier.
With the law firm Perkins Coie.
Right, with all sorts of entities in D.C. in typical fashion. So this is all bought and paid for. Everyone here is on somebody's payroll. It's a creation of the Democratic National Committee, in other words. And then they have sympathetic people in the FBI, in some cases married. We got intermarriage in this mess, this incestuous thing. And now we funnel this completely fraudulent dossier, which should be given no credibility, back to FBI and DOJ officials who then use it to launch an investigation. We create a lie, feed it to our partisans inside the bureaucracy. And now 2 years later, well, I mean, depending on when you count, closer to 3 years later now, we're still chasing this fantasy, which was a complete hit job from the outset. And literally, I mean, some of these guys like McCabe appear to have gotten really excited along the way, but clear everybody's intention in all of this was to get Donald Trump out of office. We don't care what those American people said. They're a bunch of idiots. They don't know. We're smarter than all of them. We get to decide who rules over the country, and we're going to completely overturn a free and fair election and install somebody else in the White House. That's exactly what this is, and we really, all of us, need to face that, because if that's where you are, wow, I mean, literally, you're about one step from a president not leaving office, having two presidents, each one of which say, "I declare the other one invalid." I mean, this kind of madness that we used to think was science fiction or crazy, that could never happen in the United States, and yet we're about one step from there.
When there's a conflict, when there's a military conflict, and when there's an intelligence conflict, when there's a political conflict, necessarily started by one side, where the other side has to respond or react, one side generally, I would say, creates a war room. And in this war room, you're going to solicit and mobilize some exceptionally talented operatives that have been around Washington, D.C. for decades that can help, I would say, track the maze and clear these roadblocks. And I'm rather stunned that I haven't seen a Trump White House or outside entities going to the Trump White House and saying, "We created this war room, and this is how you're going to prevail in all of this." It seems as though we're allowing the chairmen of committees to do the hard work, and there's so much other work they need to be doing, like in the case of Brett Kavanaugh with the Senate Judiciary Committee. I'm kind of stunned that there's just not a war room, Sam. Am I just living in unicorns and someplace else I need not to be?
No, I think you're right. I mean, look, what is very clear is that the Trump administration has had massive growing pains. Many missteps in terms of bringing people into the White House. Folks who arrived and within days departed. And in retrospect, you have no idea why they were brought in the first place. Part of that, part of that is just that folks need to understand, I think, that while Trump is a Republican president, he is by no means obviously an establishment Republican president.
Correct.
And he did not arrive there with the usual Republican president would arrive with a whole thousands of names
Army.
on a list of all the guys and gals who show up in Washington and fill offices for every Republican president. Both parties have these lists. He arrives, and really, in terms of people who are going to line up with him, doesn't really have any such list. So, and it's a massive undertaking. It's a huge thing. And beyond that, just having a hard time getting a hold of people and getting your legs under you. I think we need to face the fact that there's a big chunk of the Republican Party establishment that's not helping him at all. I mean, they, at a minimum, they just sort of stand clear at critical junctures. I mean, we're going to fight over a border wall, right? Well, before the Republican majority in the House left, They passed a bill appropriating billions of dollars for a border wall, and they sent it to the U.S. Senate. So it was already passed by the House. It went to the Senate, where there's a Republican majority, still is. And Mitch McConnell wouldn't move it because he won't suspend this whole filibuster provision.
Mm-hmm.
He continues to insist on a 2/3 majority. He had a majority of votes, and yet he sat on the entire thing.
Mm-hmm.
It was handed to him already passed by the House of Representatives. He could have put it through the Senate in a heartbeat, and this entire issue would be behind us. That is a Republican Party establishment decision not to pass that, not to change those rules, because there's nothing in the Constitution that stopped him.
And yet, interestingly enough, two big pieces of legislation did pass: the tax reform bill and this, prison sentencing reform thing.
Mm-hmm.
and so it's almost as though in a 4-year term for a president, you can only do one thing a year. And we're into this 3rd year, and we're working very hard to do something with the wall, but we haven't addressed immigration as a total package.
No, exactly.
And therein lies, I would say, another problem, correct?
Well, right, because the wall is just a piece of a much bigger thing. But this president, a Republican president, was in power for 2 full years with control over both houses of Congress. And yet, as you say, there's a handful of things that could be passed. Everything that we're now fighting with the Democrats about, or he's fighting with the Democrats about, could have been passed in those first 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yet, most of it did not make it through. Most of it, with Republican majorities in both houses, sat there. And that's Mitch McConnell and all of these other folks refusing to get behind that agenda. I agree with you on the immigration thing. There's massive issues. I mean, we got to come up with some kind of resolution of the entire Dreamer thing. We got to
chain migration and the visa. Yeah,
there's 50 different pieces here. I mean, one of the biggest problems we have with immigration is folks just coming here on tourist visas or student visas and never leave the country.
Mm-hmm.
They don't sneak across the border. They fly into a major airport and then just never go home. I mean, there's a hell of a lot more than just building a wall that we got to do.
You're going to laugh, but I think at this point we ought to just go in and buy the country of Honduras and be done with it. All the labor's left. The labor's.
There's so many pieces to this, Denise. I mean, when people start talking about this and they don't want to build a wall while the entire country of Mexico is rapidly transforming into basically a narco state. I mean, you got El Chapo was just convicted. Well, one of the pieces of testimony during his trial was that these guys are handing the president of Mexico $100 million and buying off the heads of the security service. Forget about arresting them. They own the country next door.
Yes.
And yet we can't even agree on controlling our border with a narco state. That's where we are.
And so we're in a situation here where we continue to give Mexico, under the Meredith Initiative and USAID and, the Millennium Challenge, money to Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, big dollars, when I would say that they're wealthier now than they've necessarily ever been because of the narco dollars.
They're awash of money. We do so many. I mean, down in Central America, drug cartels frequently are armed to the teeth with all the weapons in the world. Everybody thinks that they're smuggling them in. Well, sometimes they are. Most of the time, they're buying them from the local military and police, and those guys are getting the weapons from us.
Mm-hmm.
So we ship them to the military in Honduras, and then those guys sell them off to the drug cartels. So the drug cartels have brand new M4s and every other weapon.
50 calibers.
Courtesy of the American taxpayers. Yeah.
We start off with the coup thing. I would argue that Trump, in fact, has some arrows in his quiver that he probably does not necessarily know about, that he can go through what I would say a counter coup on the Democrats. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think there ought to definitely be a full and fair investigation into this. But I think, and there are probably, well, not probably, there are definitely people involved here in this thing that need to go to jail. I think as we do that, we need to be careful that we don't fall prey to saying, well, they can color outside the lines, so let's do that too.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's just acid that eats away at the rule of law. So, full, fair, real, impartial investigations, follow the facts where they take you, all for it. Just get even, okay, well, like I say, then the next thing you know, it's going to be a few years from now, and you're going to find that we've all lost the bubble. We just got a president that won't leave office, or we've got two separate presidents, each one claiming they're legit. We got to get out of this partisan. I mean, I believe in being hard hitting. We got to remember what the rule of law means. Get back to the Constitution.
If only.
Yeah.
I'm so struggling here with what some countermeasures can be, because there are some people in Washington D.C. that know where the skeletons are and have the keys to the kingdom.
Yep.
And I think some of those could be some arrows in his quiver that Mick Mulvaney, his chief of staff, could be walking over there to Congress and going, look, you guys need to stop some of this, Adam Schiff and Chris Coons. And if they don't, then, we're going to put some other things on the table. So, and staying within the Constitution and oversight. But we have to measure those actions very carefully, correct?
Yeah, and where I would suggest we start with not with the elected politicians, but with the federal officials and bureaucrats complicit in this. Mm-hmm. Folks sitting inside our intelligence and law enforcement organizations, clearly acting outside the law, clearly exceeding their authority. Those are folks. I think there's a good starting point. No, it's not okay to sit inside the Department of Justice or the FBI and start basing your actions on partisan considerations. You don't get to decide who's president of the United States. That's what the American people do.
Yeah, with all the chatter of eliminating the Electoral College too. So, well, thank you, Mr. Sam Faddis, for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience. I hope that, what you and I kind of shared here is enough to have the listeners give a little bit of thought to some things. And so thank you for being with us. And ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way. So stay with us.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and I carry my Sig Sauer 9mm every day. It's like a MasterCard. I never leave home without it.
And I'm glad you do, given that you work in Atlanta every day, talking about a rough place to work.
Well, Donna, I would say that most of our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners not only own, but carry their weapons too. It's just the thing to do nowadays.
So do I, Don. And we need to share with our listeners a fantastic weapons company, Tar River Arms. Oh, and I should mention, they were founded by United States Marine, enough said, right? Badass-o-matic.
TarRiverArms.com. That's TAR Riverarms.com.
Tar River Arms, America's first virtual gun store, makes it easier and more comfortable than ever to purchase your firearm online. And through 3D interactive experiences, you can even view and inspect that gun you're purchasing.
They even have weekly specials that eliminate shipping and broker fees, Donna. Great guns, great prices, and great service. And remember, Tar River Arms is veteran-owned and operated.
Don, would you expect anything less from a Marine?
No, ma'am.
At TarRiverArms.com, you can search by caliber, manufacturer, and firearm types. Revolvers, semi-automatic pistols, including your SIG, Don, short-barrel rifles, long rifles, shotguns, and NFA silencers. They even have very hard-to-find products such as the H&K MP5. Totally badass.
Tar River Arms have some of the coolest high-end tactical weapons made, all at great prices.
TarRiverArms.com, U.S. Marine owned and operated.
Hoorah!
Hey gang, did you know that the big cellular companies fund liberal causes and candidates, not Patriot Mobile?
You're correct, Donna. Did you know that the big mobile companies have spent over $100 million to elect liberal candidates? They also fund liberal causes, agendas, and organizations such as Planned Parenthood, not Patriot Mobile.
Here's how it works. You, our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners, pay your cell phone bill every month. Then Big Mobile takes your money and gives millions to liberal candidates who authorize subsidies to provide free cell service, Obama phones, to do-nothings who vote for more liberals so they can keep getting more free stuff that you pay for. Not Patriot Mobile.
So here's how you fight back. Switch to Patriot Mobile with unlimited plans starting as low as $20 a month and stop funding the big cellular companies.
Feel good about funding the right agendas. Every dollar you spend makes a statement. What message are you sending?
And it's easy to switch. You can even keep your same number, and they've got great nationwide coverage that includes Double D Ranch.
Visit them online at patriotmobile.com or call them at 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
And for any of the guilt-ridden liberals, that's 1-800-272-8746.
Created by conservatives for conservatives. Their name says it all. Patriot Mobile. Do it now. patriotmobile.com or 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
Ladies and gentlemen, what message are you sending?
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us on the Denise Simon Experience. It was a snow day in Washington, D.C. Actually, it was so snowing that everything in the pictures looked white. I mean, everything was like gray and white. But Rachel Bovard's with us with the Conservative Partnership Institute, and we're going to cover the 1,170-page bill that I guess, did Trump sign it, Rachel?
He did. He did sign it.
Oh. Just for fun, what would have been the repercussions had he not signed it?
Well, it was up against another government funding deadline, so there would have, one of two things would have happened. One, it would have been another government shutdown, or, partial government shutdown. Recall this is about for 30% of government funding. Or Congress could have passed a straight extension of funding, so in smaller increments. So another 2-week continuing resolution to keep the government open, to give themselves more time to negotiate, or as a couple of House members were arguing, time to read this bill because it was dropped on them and they were forced to vote on it less than 12 hours after it was introduced. So one of those two things would have happened, but Trump said, hey, I'm just going to sign it. I'm declaring a national emergency to fund the wall, so this bill doesn't really matter. So he signed it.
Okay. And supposedly we have funding for 55 miles of some kind of barrier, otherwise known as perhaps fencing. And I would argue it's really not 55 miles because there's all the stipulations to that 55 miles. Is that right?
Yeah, there are some significant restrictions. The first of which, Trump cannot build any of his prototypes. And this has been in several funding bills. And so those prototypes that he had built at the border that he went down to see, he cannot build those. Basically, you can have steel bollards as a fencing product, which is basically what we have now there in numerous places. Parts of it are sort of for drones and pedestrian fencing, not actual fencing. And then we cannot build fencing in 5 public lands areas are blocked off. And then interestingly, 5 border towns in Texas have what essentially amounts to a community veto over a fence in their area. The bill says that the federal government must negotiate with these towns and then cannot move forward after the fiscal year unless the two parties have come to an agreement. So that's an interesting provision, allows the wall to be, or the fence to be vetoed at the local level, which we haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, that one that was a whole side swipe. It's not, I mean, they may have that veto power, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they would exercise it, right?
That's right. At most, it looks like they could delay, but they could delay for a significant amount of time if they chose to.
And then we have this whole thing about detention beds. It goes up, it goes down, it goes left, it goes right. But we've actually reduced it from essentially 50,000 to 40,000. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's right. Republicans came down on that number. It was more than what Democrats were suggesting initially, but overall the number is reduced. So we have fewer detention beds at the border. And recall, this is pretty important to the Trump administration because when they implemented zero enforcement at the border, meaning they actually just enforced the law at the border, that required them to detain everyone that came here illegally, as opposed to the policy of catch and release, which is what we do now. And under this bill, what we will be continuing to do, which is to say when family units arrive and claim asylum, again, these are not people that are trying to sneak across. They want to be caught so they can claim asylum. They are then given a court date and released into the interior of the country. Many of them do not show back up for that court date. Some of them do, some of them do not. But the catch and release policy has been problematic. So the Trump administration said, hey, we need more beds. We need more room to house these folks while they're waiting for their court date while we can process them. But unfortunately, Congress did not give in to that request.
Didn't the Supreme Court also rule that we couldn't keep them longer than some period of time anyway? What was it, 45 days or something?
Well, I think what you're referring to is the Flores settlement, which has actually been in place since 1997. And that was out of an appeals court, basically said, hey, you cannot detain children for more than 20 days.
Oh, that's
and
it.
The result of that has been, that is why many times some of the family separation takes place, because the adults need to be processed, but the children cannot be held for longer than 20 days. So if you bring a child with you, and actually the New York Times has reported on this even, people will bring children with them in the hopes that they can be released sooner. So there's a lot of fraud that goes on with the presence of children, with cartels that engage in child trafficking, placing children with, individuals that they smuggle over the border because they know the presence of children will ensure adults are released sooner.
Now, these asylum seekers, because we don't have, we've gone down to 40,000 beds and, we can't detain everybody. This funding bill has alternatives to a detention program where it was funded for about $40 million. I understand that's where they're supposed to wear an ankle bracelet or something. Is that right?
Yeah, so that was sort of the answer to the fewer detention beds. They call this program Alternatives to Detention. And it's up usually, in the interior of the country. They, instead of detaining these individuals who cross illegally, they send them up to these programs. And again, it is alternatives to detention. So like you said, they wear an ankle bracelet, or they're told to essentially show up for probation or for court dates.
Supposed to call in.
And yeah, none of that, these programs are not effective, which is usually why they haven't been funded in the past. I'm not sure why we've decided to refund them, but that is the answer to 10,000 fewer detention beds. Are these alternatives to detention programs?
Which, in my opinion, which doesn't mean much to anybody, but that also says, because they're looking for alternatives, meaning the ankle bracelet or to call in, that's really an admission by the Democrats that there's a failure there, right?
Yeah, one would think. But to be honest, the Democrats do not seem that interested in, what happens to these people once they get here. They seem far more interested in, keeping the problem of illegal immigration, first of all, not admitting it's a problem at all, but, ensuring that it continues to happen and that we don't solve any of it. We've created in this bill, we don't solve the problem, and we also create incentives for the problem to continue. So this bill, Congress has had 10 years to act on this problem. Mm-hmm. Republicans had 2 years of unified government to do something about it. Trump shut down the government over it for 35 days, and they've had the last 3 weeks, and this is the best they could come up with, which is simply a maintenance of the problem, definitely not anything to address it. Yeah.
The last time I had you on here, I bet you $1 that we'd be having the same conversation again, and you didn't take the bet, so you were smart.
I have to stay optimistic, or I can't do this job anymore.
Okay. Now, we have another interesting thing here because it appears that these unaccompanied minors are a sanctuary into themselves now, correct?
That's right. And this is one of the most troublesome aspects of this legislation. It essentially says that anyone that is a potential sponsor of an unaccompanied minor. So again, this is when the children come here by themselves. They are placed because they cannot be held. The government cannot hold them for more than 20 days. They are placed in foster care or with relatives. So those are called sponsors. So any potential sponsor, not actually a sponsor, but a potential sponsor, current sponsor, or anyone that lives in the sponsor's household is basically given a deportation shield. The bill says none of those folks can be deported unless they are a convicted felon or they have a felony charge. The problem is twofold here. Well, threefold actually. First, many of these sponsors are here illegally. Up to 80% of them are here illegally. So we are, we're protecting from deportation people who are here illegally. Second, with the unaccompanied minors, many of them, and the Center for Immigration Studies has done some great work on this. This is the MS-13 pipeline. Many of these unaccompanied minors either join MS-13 or are part of MS-13. They are unknown to law enforcement, their affiliation, so they don't have that felony that would get them kicked out of the country. So we're bringing them in. But third, and I think probably the most pernicious aspect of this, is that we are now incentivizing. We are further incentivizing this child trafficking, this coming with children, this having a child with you, because that is now your deportation shield. Everyone in the household is now protected from deportation because of the presence of this child.
Go straight to go and collect your $200, right?
Yeah, more or less. Unless this person has a felony, which again is pretty high threshold. You have to be known to law enforcement. You have to do something pretty bad. They're not going to get deported. So we are not even, acknowledging anymore that coming here illegally is an act of illegality. We are simply brushing over that completely, and we're saying, you come here illegally, it's fine. We're not going to deport you because as long as you have a child with you, because of this new law, you're going to be pretty well protected from any kind of detention or deportation. And that is, a significant new incentive for, people who want to come here illegally to come here illegally, and to do so either dragging a child with them on a pretty dangerous journey or, getting involved with traffickers who can produce or procure a child for you.
Somewhere between the Department of Homeland Security and the State Department and Health and Human Services, we have these funding grant things that we do on these organizations, mostly churches. Lutherans and Catholics, I think, are the highest percentage that are part of this Underground Railroad, if you will, giving sanctuary. And we help fund those kinds of things because I guess we don't have enough beds. Are we to the point where we should necessarily look at this grant money going to these churches and these organizations to slow that down or change the applications for that grant money?
Yeah, I think it's something that's worth looking at. I think we've seen a number of these organizations, and I wrote about this, the direct links they have to some of these caravans that start in Central America and move up toward the United States. They're involved. A lot of these nonprofits are involved in that, specifically out of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it is worth looking at. You don't want to be providing federal taxpayer money to groups that are trying to convince people to overtly do an end run around U.S. immigration law. So I do think it is worth looking at.
Yeah, because bless Jeff Sessions for the moment when he was attempting to halt the monies, federal dollars going into sanctuary cities. Obviously, that's sitting in court. But there's this other step here that we're also giving essentially sanctuary federal dollars to these organizations. And I think that if we start looking at those intensely and changing the stipulations in order to get that grant money, that may change some things around. I would also say that maybe there ought to be some kind of inspections for these people that have some kind of a large house or building that they're housing 10 or 20 people, and see if they meet some kind of inspection standard. Is there any kind of a handle on that?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of, but I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, these are the things that we're not allowed to talk about when we talk about illegal immigration.
Yeah.
You know, we're not allowed to talk about sort of the motives of people or sort of what they want to get involved in, but we know these things happen. The Customs and Border Patrol know these things happen. So does Immigration Services. So I think it's just a question of, you know, how far are we going to go to enforce our laws? That has always been the question with illegal immigration.
Mm-hmm.
The Obama administration did not enforce a lot of laws at the border. Zero tolerance, which was maligned in the press when it was used by President Trump, was simply actual enforcement of our laws. Was roundly decried, as punishing and harsh. So, we have laws in the books that we don't enforce, and that I think is probably the part and parcel of the biggest problem with illegal immigration, and we're never going to solve the problem if we aren't able to actually get a handle on our enforcement.
Is there some kind of legal action we can take for cities and states and whatever for not following the law? I mean, if we've got a state legislature that says we're going to do this, they take an oath. Why don't we, start suing them or arresting them for not following the law? They're in violation of the law.
Yeah, that's something that Jeff Sessions tried to take on from the Department of Justice. He basically said, look, I don't think that, these sanctuary cities who are in direct violation of the law should be able to receive federal funding. And again, they were countersued by these state and local jurisdictions, and that is now tied up in the courts. But that was the basis for the action that the Justice Department took, was exactly what you said. Look, if you're going to violate the law, you should not be in receipt of these funds. So the outcome of that obviously is still not complete, but one would hope that, the court sides with the Justice Department on this.
All right, let me ask you a off the wall question. We had, several years ago, the Gang of Eight out of the Senate that had passed an immigration reform bill. And when it got over to the House, it just fell on the floor. Have any of the senators resurrected that or pulled it out of a file cabinet and said, let's look through this thing again? Because what we just went through with the whatever number of pages it was and getting 1.3 billion hasn't even begun to address the whole major issue here, and that is taking a wider look. I mean, the Gang of Eight bill, obviously, because of where we are today, it would have to have a whole new look. Has there been any kind of discussion on the Senate side to have a review committee on that?
Not yet, and I honestly think that this is the last time we're going to see this Congress discuss illegal immigration for the rest of President Trump's term. This is an issue that, if there is one thing that is bipartisan about it, it's avoidance. Neither party wants to deal with this because there's this sort of pernicious compromise between or alliance between open borders Democrats and Republicans, K Street Chamber of Commerce Republicans who want cheap labor. And both of them have sort of agreed that they will not touch this issue because it works for both of them. So, these parties are negotiating only because President Trump dragged them kicking and screaming to the table. This is not something that they wanted to do. So now that sort of the president has lost his leverage on this and lost the ability to force them to the table anymore, he's not going to do it. He's not going to do it, and they're not going to do it. They're going to completely move on from this issue.
Okay, so what we have now is a executive order on national emergency, which I think is fine. Don't have an issue with that. And I would say and I keep saying, I'm on my own broken record, that the Senate needs to hold a hearing on the conditions that we are in today to prove that we're in a national emergency, to prove it. I mean, put the evidence out there to support these 16 states that are suing. So when it comes to the monies that he's scrambling around government agencies trying to find, it would give more validation to his counting pennies wherever he can get them. Is that unreasonable?
I think they may do that, and I I think it would devolve very quickly into partisan bickering.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the
That's
day,
that's the good thing, especially with these cockamamie candidates out there, like the Bernie Sanders and the Kamala Harrises and the Cory Bookers. That's where I want to go. I mean, that would be fine with me. Let's put it out there.
yeah, and at the end of the day, it's worth pointing out that presidents have declared national emergencies for much, much less than the border.
Yes,
So
blood
I think
diamonds.
Blood diamonds is a great example. President Bush tried to declare an emergency to build a Guantanamo courthouse in the United States. I mean, all of these things, the threshold for national emergencies is pretty low. And, the Congress has given the presidents this authority. They gripe about it being used, but it's Congress who's passed 136 statutory provisions to give presidents the authority to declare national emergencies. And then they get all bent out of shape when the president actually uses it. But unfortunately, it's been Congress who's allowed the presidents to have this discretion. So this is a case of Congress ceding its authority. If they want to take it back, they should amend the National Emergencies Declaration and take their authority back. But you don't see them doing that. You just see them complaining about it.
No. So we have these 16 states that are suing. I would argue that it's going to be quite some time before that even gets through the Ninth Circuit, correct?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how fast they can fast track it, but right now it's going to be held up for a little bit.
Now we have an issue with contiguous border barriers. I mean, we know that we can't have contiguous miles of border barriers, and we've got, some small portion of 55 miles. Then we have some repairs that we're doing. And then we have eminent domain. Then we have real estate offers where the federal government is going in and buying or making an offer per acre to some of these landowners at the border. Is it true, or am I way out, in some weird zone, that even if he got, say, money for 200 miles, you wouldn't see 200 miles under immediate construction, would you?
No, most likely not. I mean, the way the bill is written, there's a tremendous amount of discretion. But, certain parts are blocked. It all takes a little bit of time. But keep in mind also that there is in law the Secure Fence Act passed in 2006, which authorizes over 700 miles of border law. And that is what President Trump is trying to direct money to. And that construction could start immediately.
Okay. But is that 700 contiguous miles?
Most likely not. It's sort of discretion is given to DHS to decide where the highest risk areas are.
Okay. All right. Also in this lack of funding bill, maybe we should call it that, there wasn't any money in there to hire more ICE agents or more Border Patrol agents. And on top of that, it restricts ICE sweeps, as we have seen happen in various locations across the country. So ICE cannot say, hey, we're going to go do a sweep over here in Lexington, Kentucky, because we know that there's at least 40 blah, blah. You know what I'm saying? So they've kind of clipped the wings on some of the operations of ICE in this lack of funding bill, right?
Yeah, to some extent, they've really come down on the authority and the flexibility that ICE and CBP have to enforce the law, which I think a lot of people have took issue with. Obviously, you don't want to tie the hands of law enforcement, particularly when it comes to such a big problem like this, but that's unfortunately the approach this bill has taken.
All right. And do we have some kind of a cap on the H-2B non-agricultural low-skilled workers visas?
Yeah, so this was a pretty interesting section of the bill. It did not originally appear in the first draft of the legislation. The quote-unquote final text was made public, and then several hours later was suddenly updated with what amounted to a doubling of the cap on H-2B workers. Again, these are low-skilled non-agricultural workers. This is what we like to call the Chamber of Commerce section. They love low-skilled, cheap labor. And somehow managed to get this in even after the text was finalized. So this was added, without any debate. I don't know if it was even noticed by a number of people because it was added so late to the process. But again, this bill was introduced, made public, and voted on less than 24 hours after it was introduced. So I'm pretty sure not a lot of people read it.
Have we inspected any of these living conditions on these H-2B non-agriculture, no-skill workers conditions? Maybe we ought to start there.
It wouldn't be a bad idea.
I mean, I'm really glad that you had summarized this, because I read the thing, not every single page, but I went through a lot of the highlights, and it's kind of like the more I read it, the more shocked I was. And now we're just kind of in a holding pattern here. We're going to go find some money, and we're going to wait for the Ninth Circuit to come out with some kind of emergency executive order decision. So next week will look like today, right?
Yeah, exactly. It all goes so fast now. I can't even keep track of it.
All right. So we have a handful of senators that are fine with all this, Republican senators, I might add, and we have some others that are still beating the drum. We even had some that refused to vote for it. Interesting reasons. You know, you had Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that voted against it, but then you also had Mike Lee and Ted Cruz and Rand Paul that voted against it, all for different reasons. Isn't that fun?
Well, the bill had plenty of reasons, so I'm not surprised they all found different ones.
Yes. All right. Well, I know that there's not many people in Washington, D.C. It seems like Nancy Pelosi's out there hanging around international places. John Kerry. We got Marco Rubio down in Latin America. I mean, people are everywhere. And here we sit. So thanks for the summary, little Miss Rachel.
My pleasure. Happy to do it.
All right. Well, make sure that you guys keep up with what Rachel's doing. She's doing the excellent work here, and we're so grateful that you could come on the Denise Simon Experience and describe all this for us. Just carry on, little Miss Rachel. We're right there with you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. More coming your way, ladies and gentlemen. Stay with us.
Hey, Donna, Cowboy Logic radio listeners love law enforcement.
That's right, Don. And Charity Magnets designs and produces beautiful, high-quality products for law enforcement supporters and enthusiasts.
They've got very impressive honor badge car magnets.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got license plate honor badges.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got cool keychains and license plate frames.
CharityMagnets.com. I'm on their website right now, and this is my favorite, the Honor Badge dog tag. Look at that little doggy with the dog tag. He's so cute.
Donna, we're trying to do an ad read, and you're playing around on their website, which happens to be CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute.
Donna.
Okay. Hey, this is huge, too. For each sale, a donation will be made to Cops for Kids with Cancer. Cops for Kids with Cancer has given more than $2.5 million in donations. Yes.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Like Donna is doing right now, go to CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute. All right, use the promo code MOJO for $5 off any purchase. I know you all love and support our brave law enforcement professionals and their families. Show your support today by going to CharityMagnets.com and check out that little puppy. He's so cute. Hey, Don, can we go to the pound, get another rescue dog, please? Pretty
No,
please?
Donna, no. 5 rescue dogs are enough, but I'm going to CharityMagnets.com, and I'm making some purchases right now.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Enter MOJO at checkout and get $5 off. CharityMagnets.com.
Let's face it, liberals are offended by everything,
Right on.
and they have zero sense of humor.
Right on.
Huh?
Right on. It's the party game that pokes fun at political correctness and liberalism run amok.
But making fun of them is hilarious for the rest of us.
So play right on and mock the progressive left and their fake news media counterparts in a variety of categories, such as race hustle, the wussification of America, earth snobs, Islam abomination, Hollywood hypocrites, and campus coddling. Feminism follies and rainbow games, and don't forget millennial entitlement and many others.
Right On, created by conservatives for conservatives.
Because mocking the left feels so right on.
Give the gift of all year long by going to rightongame.com.
That's rightongame.com. Use promo code MOJO50 for a 10% discount. That's rightongame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off.
And while you're there, check out the new drinking game option.
Warning, microaggressions contained in this box. Millennials and snowflakes will be offended by its contents. Retreating to safe spaces are highly recommended.
Rightongame.com, promo code MOJO50 for 10% off. Rightongame.com.
You can't handle the truth.
The Denise Simon Experience. The Truth Matrix. Vetting, exposing, drilling down to the truth.
Rolling Thunder, this is Hitman. Ziad, over. Hitman, this is Rolling Thunder. Ziad out.
The Denise Simon Experience. Exposing politics, lies, demagoguery, spin, fraud.
Grid to suppress. Mike Charlie, 435-9er21. Grid to mark. Mike Charlie, 4739er, 89er, out.
Promoting individual situational awareness. Question, probe, notice, ask why.
Mark smoke on the deck. 2 rounds HEPT. Gas TOT 53.
And now, the Denise Simon Experience.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I tapped a distant buddy on the shoulder, Monty Granger, otherwise known as Montgomery Granger. And he is the proud author of the book Saving Grace at Guantanamo Bay. I was just chatting offline with him that he was on Fox on Sunday morning and woke me up because I thought, I know that voice. So I decided to reach out to Monty. So welcome, Monty.
Well, thank you so much. Like I said off air, it's such a pleasure to speak with such a renowned patriot such as yourself.
Oh, thanks.
You are on the front lines.
Well, I have to cover topics from the sublime to the ridiculous for sure. But, here's something I want to, Guantanamo is not talked about really at all anymore. And I think behind the scenes, there's a lot of discussion going on about Gitmo because the Syrian Defense Forces have a bunch of Islamic State detainees.
Right.
And the Kurds have a whole pile of them. I think the Syrian Defense Forces have probably 800 or 900. And the Kurds, I think, have somewhere around 1,100. So what's particularly interesting is the CIA is tasked with going through every one of these people and determining who they are, where they came from, what connections they have, what connections they had, what their backgrounds is before we can decide what to do with them. And some of them, we figured it out, and we're asking their home countries to take them back. Very few home countries have taken them back. So we're not trying to figure out what to do. And Britain appears that they don't want to take any of them, and they're actually apparently offering to pick up the tab and have these people sent to Guantanamo. What are your thoughts?
Wow. Yeah, it's a very interesting situation. It takes me back to the fall of 2001 and the death of the first American in the global war on terror as we know it, Johnny Michael Spann, who was a CIA.
Yeah, CIA. Mm-hmm.
So Johnny Michael Spann was doing the same thing CIA are doing right now. They're interviewing the detainees. And let me just remind you and our wonderful audience that tens of thousands of unlawful combatants were captured on the battlefield in Afghanistan, but only less than 800 were ever sent to Gitmo. Did we get it right every time? Nope. We sure didn't. But we got it right enough to save many lives. So Johnny Michael Spann was killed by unlawful combatants in an uprising in a prison. And that kind of sent a strong message that it's not such a safe place to keep the bad guys. Doctrine says you keep them in country where they're captured until the end of the conflict, end of hostilities. Well, that's not always practical. So in World War II, we kept over 400,000 mostly German POWs, that's lawful combatants, in the United States without charge or trial until the end of hostilities. We sent them back. In this situation, I believe the Trump administration is doing the right thing. There seems to be continuity between political and military goals in this one instance. And I'll get back to that in a second. The reason I'm saying that is because absolutely 100% at the end of hostilities, and they could pretty much claim that, there seems to be one pocket left who don't want to surrender, they want terms, but when you're surrounded, you can't really have terms. But sending them back to their country of origin is within the law of war. It's a Geneva Convention thing. If you remember back after the first Gulf War, we had several thousand of Saddam Hussein's troops who were abandoned in our successful bid to liberate Kuwait. They surrendered while we were on the fly. Well, that was a 10-day conflict. Within 3 days after the conflict, all had been repatriated. And that's the way it's supposed to go. So if the major conflict is finished, if we're done with this war in Syria, then the law says we must repatriate. Now, who's supposed to be helping facilitate this? You don't see anything about.
No.
Is the Red Cross.
But here's the funny...
The International Committee of the Red Cross.
And we're not even sure what the country of origin is.
Well, yes, that's the other thing. I mean, you can take the person's word for it, but without documents or some kind of identification, it could be tough. And if you're the receiving country, you might say, we don't know this guy.
Yeah.
So it can get complex. But there are ways of finding out where these people originate from. And I'm sure those that have been identified, we are in intense conversation. Anything that gets leaked to the public, it's been going on intensely behind the scenes for a while. So we're trying to put diplomatic pressure on the situation so that these countries will take them back. It seems that despite Donald Trump's rhetoric before he became president that he wanted to fill Gitmo up, he has not done such. And maybe that's for the best so far, because there has to be a need for it. And it looks like there may become a need for it if the situation in Syria becomes a little unstable. And by that I mean if you pull out the conventional troops, only the conventional troops can really accommodate detention operations. Excuse me, it's an Army function, not a Marine, Navy, Air Force function. The only U.S. military that are trained to perform this is the Army. And so far as I know, they don't have conventional detention operations in Syria.
And they don't really have them in Afghanistan either, do they?
Well, no, but you could have a makeshift place on one of the bases there, a place that is accommodating. But in Syria, who knows what the conditions are like? We might have just a couple forward operating bases with literally no place to put these guys.
Or a wall. Never mind.
Right.
That was a sidebar. But the interesting thing is if we have some that are detained in Afghanistan, we don't know those numbers, and we don't know if they're Haqqani or the Pakistani Taliban or the Taliban or Al Qaeda or Jamaat al-Nusra or whatever else. But what is particularly interesting is I'm surprised that more of those detention centers in Afghanistan have not been attacked by Taliban. Have you?
Somewhat. And from what I've read, most of the detainees are in the custody of Afghanistan, not in U.S. custody. for whatever reason, but I'm sure we'd have access to them as needed. But yes, even at Gitmo, the number one threat was fratricide. We were afraid that, like they did on the Twin Towers in New York City on 9/11, that they might fly something into our detention hospital or into the holding areas and kill their own, rather than allow them to give up useful information. So I'm sure that they have that covered in Afghanistan. Nothing is 100% or for sure. They have this way of weaseling their way into things and attacking you from behind.
All the while, Monty, we have these negotiations going on with Zalmay Khalilzad leading the envoy in Qatar, with the Gitmo 5 that Obama released of the Taliban commanders. And through all of these negotiations that we keep saying, okay, we're very close to coming to some kind of peace accord, the Afghanistan government hasn't been involved in any of those talks.
The current government.
Correct.
But Hamid Karzai's been involved, and Khalilzad, of course, has a long history.
Yeah.
Afghanistan. In fact, he was born there. He is Pashto. He's of the same ilk as the Taliban, as a matter of fact. But he's a very successful businessman and negotiator and diplomat extraordinaire. People I know who say they know him, he's a great guy, but you never know. He is somebody else's tool. So he doesn't represent himself. He supposedly represents the interest of the U.S. and one would hope the future of Afghanistan. However, your point is well taken that the current government, as we know, is not involved directly in negotiations with the Taliban, which is scary. I just read an article from the New York Times by two women, Afghani women, who are involved in the government there, sort of pleading that the U.S. not remove troops, that it would create a vacuum and untenable situation, and all the work that they've done since we've been there to, bring Afghanistan back into the world of nations will be for naught. On the other side, the Taliban, the things that I've been able to get a hold of from their side on the negotiations is, we'll let women participate and this and that, but they can't be president. So there is some fright. But like I said with Pete Hegseth on Fox and Friends on Sunday morning, I'm a glass half full kind of guy. Why? Well, the Taliban want to sit down and make peace. Why do they want to sit down and make peace? They want to sit down and make peace because we're hurting them, because they're not getting what they want. And perhaps they're getting at the end of their rope. It's kind of like after the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, it was a perfect time for us to counterattack. Instead, we got Walter Cronkite on the evening news saying all is lost. The North Vietnamese had spent everything they had. And it would have been a great time to counterattack and just roll them up and say we're done here. But we didn't. We took back the cities, but we didn't follow them up. And in this situation, there's a reason why your enemy comes to the table, because they have to. And my feeling is that unless we're all getting duped, and there's great trepidation for this, that the United States and the former government of Afghanistan have, concealed from us and from the Afghanis what the true nature of this quote-unquote deal is. Mm-hmm. And then you could have, if you look at a map today, Denise, of Afghanistan, and you look at the areas controlled by the government, by the Taliban, it's almost equal.
Right.
But none of it is congruous. It's broken apart into little pieces. So how do you make peace from that? How do you then come together? So our political and military goals must be similar for us to be successful. It was successful in World War II. The Grenada invasion, the Panama invasion, the first Gulf War, our political and military goals were the same. But when they're not the same, we don't win. And that's Vietnam. that you could even say that about Korea. You could say that about our invasion of Iraq in 2003, when we simply fired the Iraqi army, became the insurgents. So our goals here, politically and militarily, have to match up.
What role have you seen that China and Russia are playing with the Taliban today?
Well, they've, I think, at least Russia has, I'm pretty sure China has in a way too, hosted some negotiations. There are definitely relationships. The Taliban are feeling puffed up, I think, because some people are actually paying attention to them. Obviously no longer considered a terrorist organization. The reality is the Taliban have not really ever threatened anyone outside of Afghanistan. Maybe some dealings with Pakistan notwithstanding, but they're not a global threat. They're not even a neighborhood threat per se, but they are a threat within Afghanistan, which, as we know, is historically strategic. So we know the Russians have wanted to control parts of Afghanistan or the whole place and have failed. We have tried to do that and have failed, both through the counter forces to Russia when they were in there and in our own conflict. It's not a place that is easy to get a hold of. And this may be another angle that the Taliban is playing on the negotiating table is, hey, you guys aren't going to defeat us anyway, so you might as well come to the table and we'll have terms. But you know what? Even if we pull out conventional forces, we're always going to have shadow warriors there, CIA. We've got big eyes in the sky from satellites, from drones. We can reach out and touch them anytime we want, which is another reason why I think they might have wanted to come to the table, because they want to sleep at night.
Where does Pakistan fit into this equation, Monty?
They're like the sneaky uncle who always shows up at the wrong time, the wrong place. You know, like a Christmas Vacation. You know, here's the uncle come and kind of sticks his nose in everything. I think they're behind the scenes, but you know, they've never done anything unless it's in their own self-interest.
Yeah.
So I don't doubt that they have a role to play here. We have publicly sort of scorned them, and Donald Trump is not having any of their nonsense. You know, the funniest thing is, I think their premier recently said that, you know, we've always been a peaceful nation. We're not trying to meddle, yet they housed Osama bin Laden for many years. Of course, they didn't know anything about that.
Sure.
So I wouldn't believe them as far as I could throw them, anything that they say. And I would assume that they were in some way trying to aid the Taliban.
Would it be ridiculous because of the sheer numbers of those that we may have detained in Afghanistan from various terror factions, as well as those from Islamic State, that we do a clone Guantanamo detention center in some other country?
Yeah, I wouldn't think that would be a priority. I think Donald Trump is willing to suffer the slings and arrows if he did want to send someone to Guantanamo. He said he would. The place has been, you know, kept up. You know, it's not all completely grown over. They're holding folks there, and they've said they can take 200 at the blink of an eye, which I believe. The Army can do anything. You know, you give us the mission, we'll accomplish the mission. If they end up in pup tents, we can do this mission. So putting it somewhere else, I think, would just open him to criticism that he's trying to protect them from, you know, lawfare and make sure that there are no, you know, untoward activities, and he's trying to hide them somewhere, etc. At least
I'm only speaking really not from a, you know, really from a volume standpoint, because I mean, Guantanamo does have a cap on what it can hold. And if we're talking several thousand, so we don't relive what we once lived, we may have to, look at some other facility, especially if Britain's like, we're not taking, these people back. You're going to have to put them someplace.
Right. I mean, again, with the military, there's always a contingency. So believe me, the war planners have been busy.
Mm-hmm.
The detention operations heads have been called to the Pentagon, and they've wargamed this many times.
Mm-hmm.
Just like before we went to Gitmo, my bosses were called to the Pentagon to discuss, should it be Guam? Should it be Diego Garcia?
Mm-hmm.
Should it be Hawaii? Well, we all voted for Hawaii, but we ended up at Gitmo because logistically and security-wise, it was the best place. So I'm sure they've wargamed this. They have several options that they're putting before the commanders, and the commanders put these options before the president. And so he's got a pocket full of choices right now.
Mm-hmm.
We just don't know what they are. And they may very well be somewhere else besides Gitmo. Where? Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia is kind of friendly with the Taliban.
And so is Qatar.
So is Qatar. So, where in the Arab world do you send them to Israel and piss everybody off? I mean,
or Kuwait.
Kuwait is Jordan willing to?
United Arab Emirates, Oman.
So, we have our own laundry list, but who knows at this point? Would I choose Gitmo? Absolutely, positively would, because you have the infrastructure.
Sure. Well, you have the model there. The whole book is there, right?
It's there, and there is room for expansion.
Interesting.
With all the old facilities that they could have running in a few days, they could handle, I think, almost 2,000 detainees without too much problem. I mean, they say 200 because that's what they've been told.
Sure.
To but all the other facilities, all you need is weed cutters and environmentalists to go through and clean the place up, and Zippo, you're ready to go.
Ladies and gentlemen, big, huge round of applause to Monty Granger. If you haven't gotten his book, Saving Grace at Guantanamo Bay, make sure you do that. Thank you very, very much, Monty. Nice to hear your voice again. Ladies and gentlemen, there's more coming your way, so stay with us.
This is Don Newen with Cowboy Logic Radio, and I carry my Sig Sauer 9mm every day. It's like a MasterCard. I never leave home without it.
And I'm glad you do, given that you work in Atlanta every day, talking about a rough place to work.
Well, Donna, I would say that most of our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners not only own, but carry their weapons, too. It's just the thing to do nowadays.
So do I, Don. And we need to share with our listeners a fantastic weapons company, Tar River Arms. Oh, and I should mention, they were founded by United States Marine, enough said, right? Badass-o-matic.
TarRiverArms.com. That's TAR Riverarms.com.
Tar River Arms, America's first virtual gun store, makes it easier and more comfortable than ever to purchase your firearm online. And through 3D interactive experiences, you can even view and inspect that gun you're purchasing.
They even have weekly specials that eliminate shipping and broker fees, Donna. Great guns, great prices, and great service. And remember, Tar River Arms is veteran-owned and operated.
Don, would you expect anything less from a Marine?
No, ma'am.
At TarRiverArms.com, you can search by caliber, manufacturer, and firearm types. Revolvers, semi-automatic pistols, including your SIG, Don, short-barrel rifles, long rifles, shotguns, and NFA silencers. They even have very hard-to-find products such as the H&K MP5. Totally badass.
Tar River Arms have some of the coolest high-end tactical weapons made, all at great prices.
TarRiverArms.com, U.S. Marine owned and operated.
Hoorah!
Hey, gang, did you know that the big cellular companies fund liberal causes and candidates, not Patriot Mobile?
You're correct, Donna. Did you know that the big mobile companies have spent over $100 million to elect liberal candidates? They also fund liberal causes, agendas, and organizations such as Planned Parenthood, not Patriot Mobile.
Here's how it works. You, our beloved Cowboy Logic Radio listeners, Pay your cell phone bill every month. Then Big Mobile takes your money and gives millions to liberal candidates who authorize subsidies to provide free cell service, Obama phones, to do-nothings who vote for more liberals so they can keep getting more free stuff that you pay for. Not Patriot Mobile.
So here's how you fight back. Switch to Patriot Mobile with unlimited plans starting as low as $20 a month and stop funding the big cellular companies.
Feel good about funding the right agendas. Every dollar you spend makes a statement. What message are you sending?
And it's easy to switch. You can even keep your same number, and they've got great nationwide coverage that includes Double D Ranch.
Visit them online at patriotmobile.com or call them at 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
And for any of the guilt-ridden liberals, that's 1-800-272-8746.
Created by conservatives for conservatives. Their name says it all. Patriot Mobile. Do it now. patriotmobile.com or 1-800-A-PATRIOT.
Ladies and gentlemen, what message are you sending?
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for staying with us here on the Denise Simon Experience. I got an old buddy here. We're going to still talk about immigration. So what do? I tap Matt O'Brien on the shoulder. He's the director of research over at Federation for American Immigration Reform because he's so good at what he does. And he's got more knowledge than anybody I know of. So I get to ask the off-the-wall questions to Mr. Matt. So with that, Mr. Matt, thanks for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience.
Well, thank you for having me on again. I appreciate it.
Okay. So where are we now? We have an emergency executive order, and the White House is dialing for dollars in all kinds of federal agencies to see if they can't come up with something. So we got that in the pipeline. Then we have 16 states that decided they were going to sue several agencies of the federal government. And now we have the House, especially Congress, that wants to take up some action to veto Trump's emergency order. So that's kind of where we are. So I had a feeling that nobody was really talking about it, and I had to go look up this whole executive order emergency declaration thing. And Congress does have veto power, correct?
It does. Congress doesn't really veto this. What Congress has to do is it has to pass a joint resolution ending the emergency.
Okay.
So they're talking about this, but it's not clear that Congress is going to have the votes necessary to effectively do that.
Interesting. There's really nothing. I would say that the Democrats are really kind of conflating this action because they're merging his dialing for dollars and trying to raise 8 million or whatever the number ends up, 8 billion, whatever the number ends up being, to the emergency order. But he can do an emergency order, and that really can't be challenged. And I would say that there's certainly enough cause, especially if you're in a crisis situation where you don't have enough beds in detention. Correct, Matt?
Yeah, those things can certainly come up. So this all goes back to the 1976 National Emergencies Act, which was put into practice, put into legislation by the Congress after Congress took a look at the powers the president had available as emergency powers. And there are currently 123 distinct statutes that grant the president emergency authority to respond to a wide variety of different situations. And the function of the National Emergencies Act was to put a framework in place so that the president could invoke these powers, and then there would be a standardized method, a standardized type of decree that comes out from the president, and then Congress would have the ability to oversee this as Congress does. So a lot of this complaining is really kind of mind-boggling because since the act was put in place, there's been 58 national emergencies declared that covered all manner of different circumstances, and there's 31 of those that still remain in effect at present. So this is not something that's a shocking use of the power by any stretch of the imagination.
I looked at all of the 31 that we're currently under. Now, exactly why would blood diamonds be a national emergency?
Well, I don't think they really are, and this gets to the heart of the matter. There's a lot of flexibility here for the president under his powers as the commander-in-chief of the military services and under his diplomatic and foreign relations powers that are contemplated under these statutes. And so the blood diamonds issue, I think, had a lot to do with the United States stance on human rights in the world in general and the desire to kind of put a lock on commerce that involved blood diamonds because we wanted to send a message to some of our allied nations in Africa that we wanted to assist them, we wanted to have good foreign relations with them, but we didn't want them engaging in sketchy practices in order to obtain and market their diamonds. So, of course, that makes sense. But when you try and cast that in contrast to the crisis on the southern border, that's something that pales in comparison in terms of its, its effect on everyday Americans, but also on its overall effect on the international relations and foreign policy of the United States. So it's crazy.
At the same time, is it not curious that we haven't taken some of these drug cartels and put them on a terror list, or is MS-13 on a domestic terror list?
I don't believe that it's on any terror list, and it's interesting because there are good reasons why we may not want to do that. I mean, we have a problem on the left-hand side of this issue where organizations like the ACLU and the SPLC claim that membership in a gang is a First Amendment freedom of association issue. I can see to a certain point how there are some organizations where you would want to call that into question. But once something becomes a criminal organization that falls within the racketeer influence corrupt organization statutes, then I think you're pretty clearly in something that's being entered into solely for a criminal purpose, and so the First Amendment issue goes away. The thing that becomes touchy with the terrorism issue is that MS-13 really isn't engaging in any of this for any political purpose or for the overthrow of the government. As a matter of fact, organizations like the drug cartels and MS-13 are really preying upon people's obedience to the law. One of the ways that they are able to assert their authority is by relying on the fact that you and I aren't going to behave in the way that they behave. So they're terrorizing people, but they're doing it from a criminal monetary end, which is a little different than Al-Qaeda, which really only cares about making money to the extent that that money allows it to continue its efforts to overthrow not only the United States, but all Western governments. So you get into a little bit of a weird zone there with gangs and cartels and terrorism.
The reason I ask about the cartels is because the cartels, I think that once we get all of the testimony out of the El Chapo Guzman trial, we may find that the cartels, those in Mexico, the Sinaloa, the Zetas, or whatever, are in fact its own government and have paid off government officials. So it does enter a gray area, correct?
100% correct. And there's actually a really phenomenal book on this called Out of the Mountains, written by David Kilcullen, who is a terrorism expert. He's a retired colonel from the New Zealand Army. I had a chance to meet him at a course that I took one time. A very brilliant guy. And he says one of the big problems that you have with both terrorist organizations and criminal organizations like drug cartels is that they will go into poverty-stricken areas and they will gain support from the local population by doing things like delivering fresh water, electricity, and functioning sewage when the governments can't do that. So there is a gray area, and one of the arguments for addressing drug cartels and gangs as a terrorism issue goes back to the fact that we don't want them cross-linking with the terrorists and getting involved in politics, either because it's good for their business or because they're exploiting a void in countries like Honduras and Guatemala where MS-13 is working so effectively.
Fascinating. There's a lot of moving parts and certainly a good handful of legal arguments and all of that one. Okay, so now we have 16 states that are suing the federal government. And I think we have an Obama appointee judge that is pulled the long straw or the short straw to take the case in California. I think his name is Blakely. So it's going to take some time, unless it's fast tracked, for this lawsuit against the federal government to get some traction. Is this a 30-day thing, Matt, or is this a 6-month thing?
Well, we're in the Ninth Circuit, which we lovingly here call the Ninth Circus, and because of the activist, very hard left-leaning approach that the Ninth Circuit takes toward everything, it remains to be seen, because things tend to get decided there based on a very progressive social agenda rather than by applying the law. And it's been a huge problem. That's why the Ninth Circuit is the most overturned of the federal circuits. It tends to have a lot of its decisions overturned on appeal. The interesting issues that are going to come up in connection with this case is, number one, can the states that are filing this lawsuit actually allege any injury? It's kind of hard to argue that, particularly if you're not a border state, that you're going to have any injury whatsoever that comes up from the United States building a barrier along the border. It's even harder to make an argument that the invocation of an emergency is going to have a direct effect. The states that are on the border will probably have more of an argument. What legitimate legal arguments they're going to have that this is going to have any effect on their economy? I mean, I don't know how you can go into a federal court with a straight face, even as somebody as left-leaning as Javier Becerra, and say, shutting off illegal immigration to the United States is going to cut the supply of illegal alien employees that agriculture and construction are dependent upon in California. Now, if you tried to make that argument in another more centered circuit, then the response from the judges should be, so wait a minute, you're saying that your economy is dependent upon people violating U.S. immigration law. How is that supposed to work? So it's really hard to predict what's going to go on with this lawsuit, because it's on shaky legal ground to begin with. There's a big question as to whether the courts would simply, if it weren't the Ninth Circuit, or possibly even if there's a miracle in the Ninth Circuit, if the courts wouldn't simply invoke what's called the political question doctrine, which says that there are certain issues that are so political in nature that they belong to the executive and the legislature to work out, and the courts simply don't have any authority to pronounce on them because it's not appropriate for the courts to be involved in them. They lack expertise, and the courts are not set up to respond to the will of the American public. So this is kind of a wild card right now.
I do need to make a correction. The judge that's been chosen for this one is Hayward Gillum Jr. Of the Northern District of California. So I wanted to make sure that I made that correction.
He's got a very judicial-sounding name, I'll give him that.
Well, he also came from Covington and Burling, Eric Holder's former law firm. So I would imagine there's some interesting emails flying back and forth there about now. But now, how nuts would it be if, in fact, there was almost a countersuit where the federal government can begin to sue states and or local legislatures for their sanctuary city status as being a threat to public safety? And I think we can easily make that case in the state of California, or am I just grasping at something?
You're not grasping at all. As a matter of fact, it's not remotely nuts. It's so rational and logical that the federal government under Jeff Sessions did exactly that. The Ninth Circuit, one of the district courts within the Ninth Circuit, dismissed a significant portion of the lawsuit on what I thought were really ridiculous grounds. The court dismissed the portion where the federal government challenged the California Department of Justice's ability to inspect federal detention facilities.
Yes.
Well, the fact is, under a federalist system of government, the state and local entities don't have any authority to inspect federal detention facilities, particularly when the federal government is exercising an exclusively federal zone of law, which immigration, the fact is, under Davis v. Arizona, or Arizona v. Davis, I apologize, I always get it backwards. The case that dealt with Arizona's state immigration enforcement laws, the Supreme Court held that immigration is a preempted federal zone, and that the federal government is the only entity that has the authority to legislate on immigration, except in a few very small areas where things like immigration overlap with driver's licenses and things like that. And because of that, you have a Supreme Court precedent saying that the states don't have any authority to play in that sandbox. So it's impossible to me to understand how states can do things like establish sanctuary policies and claim that they have the right to inspect federal immigration detention facilities. But getting back to your original question, it's not insane at all. That's exactly what Jeff Sessions did, and it's exactly what the Justice Department should be doing. They should be engaging in a massive counter-litigation strategy to kind of block these things, and they should be moving to dismiss a lot of these lawsuits as they come up from the states, because many of them are just silly. They don't have any legal merit whatsoever.
Well, I knew that Jeff Sessions had done that, and I knew that that's kind of caught up. But did he include the matter of public safety? I mean, we have got some number of disease that we have essentially eradicated here in the United States that is rearing its ugly head again. Then we, have some criminal element that is in the passage of some number of these people coming in from the southern border. I just read that we actually deported somebody, I think out of Boston earlier in the week, that was wanted for murder in his home country. So I guess the question then becomes, was Sessions' lawsuit comprehensive enough to cover all the bases, or is it smarter to do more than one lawsuit in the matter of public safety?
I think the answer is both. So Sessions' lawsuit was fairly comprehensive. You get into a little bit of a weird zone with this stuff in that the federal government is not considered to have general police powers the way that states are. Now, that doesn't mean police like blue uniforms and black and white cars. It means that the states have a general authority to protect their citizens, but since the federal government is responsible for keeping the union together and overlays the state governments, the federal government's zone of responsibility for citizens is different. This is an interesting area because you're talking about regulating people coming in from outside the United States, so there's definitely a public health responsibility, but the federal government can't pursue this on a general police authority grounds the way that the states could when states regulate consumer affairs things or certain types of food laws and things like that. So it gets a little bit technical in that sense, but generally speaking, public health, crime, and national security are the three big issues. And that is what AG Sessions included in the lawsuit, and it's what the federal government should be harping on in response to all of these things. If I were drafting these, I would be saying, the state of California doesn't have anything to do with this. It's a national security issue. The state of California can protect its citizens from things like earthquakes and crime, but it's the federal government's responsibility to manage the war powers and the foreign relations powers of the United States. Therefore, this is not something that California should be involved in at all. And I think the Trump administration is finally getting the message that litigation has to be a key part of this and that they need to pursue a litigation strategy. But they've been a little slow out of the gate with that, to be honest.
Yeah, I would say. Anybody here, I think the Supreme Court ruled that anybody here, any foreign person that is here in the United States is protected by the Constitution, correct?
That is correct, but the fact is that not everybody is protected by the Constitution the same way. If I'm 14 years old and I want to drive to the local bar and have a drink, I can't file a lawsuit complaining that the state won't give me a license and won't allow me to have an alcoholic beverage. So the fact is that while people are entitled to due process and basic constitutional protections like free speech, the fact that you're not a U.S. citizen is a clear legal distinction, and people tend to confuse constitutional protections and due process protections with the notion that somehow people who are from foreign countries are entitled to be treated under the law once they're in the United States exactly the same way as everyone else. And that's just simply not true. We have lots of legal distinctions. We distinguish between people who are old enough to collect certain types of benefits. We distinguish between people who are married versus single. So those things are all part of the law. And this notion that we have to give foreigners, and particularly illegal aliens, everything in exactly the same way as we give it to citizens is just, it's not supported by 2,000 years of Anglo-American common law history, but it just also, as a general legal precept, doesn't stand up to scrutiny at all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're speaking with Matt O'Brien, the Director of Research for the Federation of American Immigration Reform. Matt, here's a bizarre question. Does the president hold the authority such that he can suspend, under the guise of national security or emergency status, piece parts of law like, I mean, we saw it in the previous administration, but we have what is known as quotas. And we allow X number of people to come into the United States every year under a quota.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if a president has the authority, that I would take that quota right now to 0, because we are already beyond that quota. How bizarre is that notion?
It's not a bizarre notion at all. It gets a little bit confusing because Congress does have a role in that whole quota setting process, and the overall number of people who are admitted into the United States as lawful permanent residents each year is done by this really complex formula. There's a guy at the State Department that calculates it, and I've always joked that if he ever gets hit by one of the Washington metro trains or the bus, that nobody else is going to know how to do this, and we're going to have to shut down immigration. He's a nice guy, so I don't want to see anything bad happen to him at all. But it's this thing that's so complex that they typically find somebody with some kind of a mathematical background to calculate it. Now, that formula was set in place as part of the Immigration and Nationality Act by Congress. Now, where this gets into the president's authority is the same segment of the Immigration and Nationality Act that came up in the Trump v. Hawaii case with the so-called travel ban, which was never really more than a temporary moratorium. It wasn't a ban at all.
Right.
And 1182F appears to indicate that the president can suspend or depart from certain portions of the Immigration and Nationality Act in order to respond to emergent national security situations and international relations questions that come up. Now, in the Trump v. Hawaii decision in dicta, the Supreme Court did hint at the fact that this may be much more of a, for lack of a better term, a suspension provision that allows the president to temporarily suspend certain aspects of the Immigration and Nationality Act. The problem is that they did not directly address that issue in the decision, so it's still sort of an open question as to how far the president can go. I would say that the actual wording of 1182F indicates that for national security reasons, the president has a pretty wide authority. Now, I don't know whether the Supreme Court would agree with me on that, but I think that a lot of people that study this issue on a regular basis, I think the Heritage Foundation has read it in a similar way. I think some of the other more conservative organizations here in D.C. have. So it's not a bizarre question at all. And it really does. The president's office is unique in the sense that we're in a republic. Congress bears the primary share of authority for establishing what the law should be. But the president, as the chief executive, has to respond to emergent situations that come up all of a sudden, and he can't go asking for Congress to engage in the lengthy deliberative process that's part of our democracy every single time he needs to make a decision, or he wouldn't be able to get anything done. And I think that's why we have a system of checks and balances, so that we can do things, and then if they're not the appropriate response, the checks and balances can kick in. But the fact is that we have to do something. And what we're really having here is a debate about an open borders philosophy, which I think has exposed itself as being flawed from the very beginning, and a controlled borders philosophy where people say, listen, our sovereignty is what keeps us American and what keeps us free, and the only way that we maintain our sovereignty is if we have a border. If we don't have a border, we don't have a country. And it's hard to reconcile those views when the Democratic Party in particular has made a turn as hard left, globalist, progressive as it appears to have done during the last election. And you have people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez who make these just absolute nonsense statements about things like walls are immoral. I'm guessing that she lives within 4 of them in order to protect herself from rain, the snow, and burglars. So I'm not sure why walls are inherently immoral, and she never did explain that. But when you have that sort of notion being advanced by the Democratic Party, it becomes extremely difficult to find a middle ground, because I think most people who are on the more conservative side of this issue don't really see themselves as being particularly conservative. They see themselves as being logical in that it's our country, and it's not mean or unkind or uncaring of us to say we're going to determine who comes here and how long they stay. That's just sort of a basic function of a sovereign nation. We can't take everyone, and we have to be responsible about who we let in for our own safety, but for the safety of the people coming in as well.
Well done, Mr. Matt O'Brien. Thanks so much for being with us on the Denise Simon Experience. Ladies and gentlemen, we were happy that you could be with us for the ride, and we'll see you again very soon.
Hey, Donna, Cowboy Logic radio listeners love law enforcement.
That's right, Don. And Charity Magnets designs and produces beautiful, high-quality products for law enforcement supporters and enthusiasts.
They've got very impressive honor badge car magnets.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got license plate honor badges.
CharityMagnets.com.
They've got cool keychains and license plate frames.
CharityMagnets.com. I'm on their website right now, and this is my favorite, the Honor Badge dog tag. Look at that little doggy with the dog tag. He's so cute.
Donna, we're trying to do an ad read, and you're playing around on their website, which happens to be CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute.
Donna.
Okay. Hey, this is huge, too. For each sale, a donation will be made to Cops for Kids with Cancer. Cops for Kids with Cancer has given more than $2.5 million in donations. Yes.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Like Donna is doing right now, go to CharityMagnets.com.
But he's so cute. All right, use the promo code MOJO for $5 off any purchase. I know you all love and support our brave law enforcement professionals and their families. Show your support today by going to CharityMagnets.com and check out that little puppy. He's so cute. Hey, Don, can we go to the pound, get another rescue dog, please? Pretty
No,
please?
Donna, no. 5 rescue dogs are enough, but I'm going to CharityMagnets.com, and I'm making some purchases right now.
Become a Blue Honor Foundation member today. Enter MOJO at checkout and get $5 off. CharityMagnets.com.